Ryan Walker did not wait until the dirt had settled over his father-in-law's grave. He did not wait until his wife stopped shaking. He did not even wait until the borrowed umbrella had dried. By Wednesday morning, less than 36 hours after Emily stood in the pouring rain and buried the only man who had ever truly loved her, Ryan slid a manila envelope across the kitchen table without a single word of warning, without a tremor in his hand, and without once meeting her eyes. Inside was a divorce filing, already signed, already dated, already submitted. Emily was 7 months pregnant. If you are watching this right now, please subscribe to our channel and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop a comment and tell us what city you are watching from, because I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now let us begin. The rain over Boston that Tuesday was the kind of rain that does not just fall, it presses. It pushes down on your shoulders, like a hand trying to remind you that the world is heavier than you thought. Emily Carter stood at the edge of a modest grave in Greenfield Cemetery, wearing a black coat that no longer buttoned over her swollen belly, her fingers wrapped tight around a single white lily, her father's favorite, and she could not stop shaking. Not from the cold, from something deeper, something that does not have a clean name. His name was Harold Carter, and to the world he was a janitor. He had worked the overnight shift at Greenfield Elementary School for 22 years. He drove a 2003 Civic with a cracked rear bumper. He clipped grocery coupons every Sunday morning with a pair of kitchen scissors that had lost their spring. He wore the same gray work jacket 5 days a week, washed it on Friday, and had it ready again by Monday. He was quiet, gentle, and completely unremarkable to everyone who passed him in the hallway without a second glance. To Emily, he was everything. He was the man who learned to braid hair from a YouTube tutorial when she was 8, because he refused to let her go to school looking like nobody cared. He was the man who showed up to every single parent-teacher conference still wearing his work uniform, because he could not afford to miss a shift, but also could not bear to miss a moment of her life. He was the man who, when she cried after her first heartbreak at 16, sat on the edge of her bed and said nothing, just put his big, calloused hand over hers and let her know she was not alone in the world. And now, he was gone. She had gotten the call at 6 in the morning 3 days ago. Cardiac arrest, sudden, no warning. He was 67 years old and had seemed the last time she saw him exactly the way he always seemed, steady, warm, untroubled. She had hugged him goodbye at his apartment door and thought, as she always did, that she would see him again soon. She did not see him again soon. She stood at his grave and tried to breathe through a grief so large it felt structural, like it was not just inside her but around her, holding the whole sky in place. Behind her, Ryan stood 3 feet away, not 2 feet, not beside her, 3 feet, just far enough to make it clear to anyone watching, and Emily was watching even through her tears, that he was present without being with her. He had his umbrella angled entirely over himself, not an inch of it extended toward his 7-month pregnant wife, who was standing in the rain getting soaked to the bone. Emily noticed. She noticed the way you notice something you have been trying not to notice for a long time, with a horrible, sinking, clarifying recognition, like a fog lifting at the worst possible moment. The priest finished his words. A few of her father's co-workers from the school came. His neighbor Dorothy, who was 73 and had brought him soup every time he was sick, pressed Emily's hand and wept. A handful of people Emily barely recognized stood respectfully at the edges. Ryan checked his phone twice during the burial. Emily saw it both times. When it was over, Dorothy pulled Emily close and whispered, "Your father talked about you every single day. Every day, sweetheart. He was so proud of who you became." Emily nodded and could not speak. Ryan was already walking toward the car. He did not offer her his arm. He did not slow his pace. He did not look back once to see if his 7 months pregnant wife, who had just buried her father, needed help walking across wet, uneven ground. Emily made it to the car by herself. She always made it by herself. She just hadn't let herself fully understand that until now. The drive home was silent in the specific way that silence has become when two people have stopped pretending. Ryan kept both hands on the wheel and his eyes on the road and offered nothing. Not a word, not a touch, not the smallest acknowledgement that the woman sitting 2 feet from him was carrying his child and had just experienced one of the most devastating losses of her life. Emily looked out the passenger window at the passing city and felt something shift inside her, not break, Shift, like a foundation settling into a new position after years of slow erosion. She thought about the last time Ryan had touched her with genuine tenderness and realized she could not remember when it was. She thought about the last time he had asked how she was feeling, not as a formality but as a real question, and realized it had been so long she could not place it in any month or season. She thought about the way he had stood at her father's grave with his umbrella pulled close, and she pressed her lips together and said nothing. That night she slept on her side of the bed and Ryan slept on his, and the distance between them felt less like distance and more like geography, like two countries with a closed border between them. She woke up at 3 a.m. with her heart pounding and the baby moving, and she lay still in the dark and told herself that grief made everything feel more extreme, that tomorrow would feel different, that she was reading too much into things because she was exhausted and devastated and 7 months along, and her father had just died, and of course everything felt impossible right now. She told herself all of those things. She believed none of them. Morning came gray and quiet. Emily was in the kitchen making tea when Ryan walked in, already dressed not in casual clothes, in a full dress shirt and slacks, like he had somewhere important to be. She looked at him. "You're going in today." "I have a meeting," he said, opening the refrigerator. "Ryan." She set her mug down. "My father was buried yesterday." "I know that, Emily." His voice was not cruel. It was something worse than cruel. It was flat, indifferent, like she had pointed out an unremarkable fact about the weather. She stared at him for a long moment. "Are you seriously going to work today?" The meeting was scheduled before any of this. He pulled out the orange juice, poured himself a glass, and put the carton back without offering her any. "I can't just disappear on people." "You can't disappear," she repeated slowly. "But you can disappear on me." He set his glass down and looked at her for the first time. That morning really looked at her. And what she saw in his face was not guilt. It was not even defensiveness. It was something that looked almost like impatience. Like she was a problem he had been managing for a long time and was growing tired of managing. "Don't make this bigger than it is," he said. He picked up his keys. He left. Emily stood in the kitchen for a long time after the door closed. The tea went cold. The baby moved. Outside, a pigeon landed on the window ledge and then flew away. She picked up her mug, poured the cold tea down the drain, and stood at the sink for a moment, with her hands braced against the counter and her eyes closed. Then she heard the whisper of her father's voice, not literally, not in the way of ghost stories, but the way the voices of people we love continue to live inside us long after they're gone. She heard him the way she always heard him when she needed to hear him most. "You are stronger than you know, Em." She opened her eyes. She washed the mug. She dried her hands. She went to sit down. And that was when she noticed it. The manila envelope on the kitchen table. She had not seen it when she first came downstairs. It was brown and rectangular and had no writing on the outside. She sat down, slowly reached for it with the careful attention of someone who has learned that unexpected envelopes rarely contain good news, and she opened it. Inside were legal documents. She read the header once, then again. Petition for dissolution of marriage, Ryan Michael Walker. Petitioner, Emily Ann Carter Walker. Respondent, filed, dated, signed. Emily set the papers down on the table very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands have stopped working properly. She smoothed the corner with her thumb, even though it did not need smoothing. She looked at the date. She looked at her husband's signature, which she had seen hundreds of times on birthday cards and lease agreements and the back of their wedding photo album, and she felt something move through her that was neither surprise nor grief. It was recognition, the kind that arrives not as a shock, but as a confirmation of everything you already knew and had been refusing to name. He had not filed this in reaction to a fight. He had not filed it in a moment of anger. The date on the filing was 3 days ago, the same morning she got the call that her father had died. While she was sitting on the bathroom floor in her pajamas trying to remember how to breathe, Ryan had been at a lawyer's office signing his name. She sat at the kitchen table for a very long time. The baby moved again, a long, slow roll that pressed against her ribs, and Emily placed both hands on her stomach and breathed. "I've got you," she said quietly. "Whatever happens, I've got you." She did not call Ryan. She did not send a message. She did not cry, though the tears were there sitting just behind her eyes, like water behind a dam. She simply sat and let the reality of what had just happened arrange itself into something she could carry. By Friday evening, she was not crying because she saw it coming, but she was not prepared for what Friday evening brought. Her friend Natalie called her at 7:15 with a voice that was tight and careful, in the way voices get when someone is about to deliver news they wish they did not have to deliver. "Emily, I need you to see something, and I need you to know that I am so sorry." "Just tell me," Emily said. "It's on Instagram, Ryan's account." A pause. "He posted something tonight." Emily opened the app with the phone pressed to her shoulder. She found his profile, the one she had not looked at in weeks, because looking at it had started to feel like looking at something that belonged to someone else's life. The post was at the top. A photo. Ryan and a woman Emily recognized immediately. Vanessa Hale, a lifestyle influencer with 300,000 followers and a carefully curated aesthetic built around luxury travel and aspirational living. They were at a restaurant, a nice one, candles, wine glasses. Vanessa's hand on the table close to Ryan's. Their postures angled toward each other in the particular way of people who have forgotten that other people are watching. The caption read, "New Beginnings." 2 words. Posted less than 72 hours after he had stood at her father's grave with his umbrella pulled over himself. Emily stared at the photo for a long time, long enough that Natalie said her name twice before she responded. "I'm here," Emily said. "I'm coming over." "No," she said it gently but firmly. "No, I'm okay. I need a minute. Emily. Natalie, I promise you, I am okay." She ended the call. She set the phone face down on the table. And for the first time since her father's funeral, she finally cried. Not the kind of crying that comes from devastation, but the kind that comes from the peculiar, exhausted relief of finally understanding exactly where you stand and exactly who you are standing across from. She cried until she was empty, and then she stopped. Because something her father had said to her once came back to her with a clarity that felt almost physical. She could hear the specific warmth of his voice, the deliberate quietness of it, the way he always chose his words like he was choosing tools carefully, one at a time. She had been maybe 14. They had just been passed over for a nicer apartment because the landlord had gone with another applicant, and she had come home furious, raging about unfairness, about how they never got what they deserved, about how the world was built to keep people like them in their place. Her father had listened to all of it without interrupting. Then he had said very quietly, "The people who are loudest about what they deserve are usually the ones who haven't figured out yet how to become someone who earns it. We don't talk about what we deserve, Em. We build." She had been annoyed at the time. She had wanted him to agree with her outrage, not redirect it. But sitting at her kitchen table at age 31, 7 months pregnant, reading the word heartbreak in the air between herself and a phone screen, she understood what he meant for the first time at the level where things actually change you. She was not weak. She had never been weak. She had simply been surrounded by someone who needed her to believe she was. That night, before she went to bed, she remembered something else, something from the last time she had seen her father alive, 2 weeks before he died. He had been sitting in his recliner drinking coffee when she arrived, and as she was getting ready to leave, he had taken her hand with both of his and held it for a long moment, longer than usual. "If anything ever happens to me," he said, "go to the bank, the one on Lexington. You know the one." "Dad, stop. Nothing's going to happen." He had looked at her with an expression she did not know how to read at the time, something layered and complicated and almost apologetic. "Just go to the bank. Promise me." "Okay," she said because it was easier. "I promise." She had not thought about those words again until now. She lay in bed and turned them over in her mind, the way you turn a stone over to see what's underneath. Go to the bank. She fell asleep with his voice in her ear and her hand on her stomach, and she told herself she would go tomorrow. She did not know yet what she would find when she got there. She did not know that everything she had understood about her father, his life, his choices, his reasons, was about to collapse into something so much larger and so much stranger and so much more deliberately loving than she could have possibly prepared herself for. She did not know that the quiet man who packed her lunches and wore a cracked sole work boot for 3 years rather than spend money on himself had spent 35 years protecting her from a world that would have swallowed her whole if it had known who she really was. She did not know that the janitor everyone looked past on their way to somewhere more important had been for her entire life quietly and patiently dismantling every trap that greed and entitlement and ruthless ambition had ever set for the people he loved. She did not know any of that yet. All she knew, lying in the dark of a bed that smelled like someone else's absence, was that her father had asked her to make him a promise, and she intended to keep it. She kept her promise at 7:30 the following morning. Emily did not sleep after Ryan left. Not really. She drifted in and out of something that felt less like rest and more like her mind, rehearsing pain, replaying the sound of papers hitting the table, the particular flatness in his voice when he said, "Sign it." The image of him walking out the door without once looking back at the woman carrying his child. At some point before dawn, she stopped trying to sleep and simply lay still with one hand on her stomach, listening to the city outside slowly wake up, and she made the decision without drama or ceremony. She was going to the bank. Today. Now. She did not know why it felt urgent. She only knew that her father had held her hand with both of his and asked her to promise, and that the look on his face when he asked had been unlike any expression she had seen on him before. Not worried, not frightened, something more deliberate than either of those things. Like a man who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has finally found the right pair of hands to pass it to. She got dressed slowly, working around the weight of her belly, and took the train to Lexington Avenue alone. The bank her father had mentioned was a private institution, not the kind with a drive-through and a lollipop jar at the teller window. It occupied a narrow limestone building on the east side of the street, understated to the point of near invisibility, the kind of place designed to be unnoticed by people who did not already know it existed. Emily had walked past it dozens of times over the years without once registering it as anything significant. A brass plate beside the door read simply, "Hargrove Private Trust, established 1947. She stopped on the sidewalk and looked at it for a moment. Then she pushed open the door and went inside. The man at the reception desk looked up when she entered, and something shifted almost immediately in his expression, a subtle recalibration, the kind that happens when someone recognizes a name they were not expecting to hear today. "My name is Emily Carter," she said. "My father was Harold Carter. He passed away 4 days ago. He told me to come here." The young professional, very still, picked up his phone without a word and made a quiet call. He spoke in a low voice she could not fully hear. Then he set the phone down and looked at her with an expression that was neither warm nor cold, but something carefully neutral, like a person who has been trained to manage information in a room where information has weight. "Miss Carter," he said, "Mr. Ellison has been expecting you. He asked that whenever you came in, regardless of the date or time, you be brought directly to him." Emily stared at him. "He's been expecting me?" "Yes, ma'am." "My father has been dead for 4 days." "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Ellison was informed immediately. He's been waiting for you to come." She followed him down a hallway that was quiet in the specific way of places where very serious things happen very calmly. At the end of it was a door, and behind the door was an office. And behind a large oak desk sat a man in his late 60s with white hair and careful eyes, and the composed, unhurried posture of someone who has spent his entire career in rooms where composure is the most valuable thing he can offer. He stood when she entered. He extended his hand. "Ms. Carter, I am Richard Ellison. I've been the primary trustee for your father's account for the past 21 years. Please sit down." Emily sat. Her hands were in her lap, the baby pressed steadily against her ribs. "My father was a janitor," she said. Not accusatory, just establishing the facts as she understood them before whatever came next rearranged them. Richard Ellison looked at her for a moment with an expression she could not quite decode. Then he opened the top drawer of his desk and removed a folder thick worn at the edges, the kind of folder that has been opened and closed hundreds of times, and placed it on the desk between them. "Your father," he said, was Jonathan Blackwood III. The room did not change, the light did not change, but something in Emily's chest did something it had never done before, contracted and expanded at the same moment, like a lung trying to breathe in two directions simultaneously. "I don't know what that means," she said carefully. "I know." He opened the folder. "Let me show you." What followed was 45 minutes that Emily would later describe to no one, because there were no words in ordinary language adequate to the experience of having your entire understanding of your own life dismantled and rebuilt in less than an hour. Richard Ellison spoke quietly, methodically, without theatrics, which somehow made everything worse and better at once. He told her that the man she knew as Harold Carter was born Jonathan Blackwood III, the only son of Jonathan Blackwood II, who had built one of the most quietly powerful private fortunes in American history across 3 generations of shipping aviation, early-stage technology investment, and international real estate holdings. He told her that 35 years ago, at the age of 32, Jonathan III had fallen in love with a woman his family considered entirely unacceptable, a school teacher from South Boston named Margaret Ann Flynn, Emily's mother, and that when the Blackwood family made it clear the relationship would cost him everything, he had chosen her anyway. He had been formally disowned. He had walked away from the inheritance from the family name, from every material advantage his birth had given him, and he had changed his name to Harold Carter and taken a job as a janitor and built a life from nothing with the woman he loved. Emily's mother died when Emily was 4 years old. A car accident on a Tuesday evening in February. Harold Carter had raised his daughter alone from that day forward in a small apartment in South Boston on a janitor's salary without ever once returning to the family whose name he had surrendered. "But the money," Richard Ellison said, and paused. "Your father was not poor because he lost access to it. He was poor because he chose to be." Emily looked at him. "What does that mean?" Ellison turned a page in the folder. "When your grandfather died 21 years ago, the estate passed not to your father who had been disowned, but to the Blackwood Family Trust. However," he looked up at her, "your grandfather in a codicil added to his will 6 months before his death included a single provision, a private provision known only to myself and the original attorneys that could not be challenged, could not be dissolved, and could not be accessed by any member of the Blackwood family without triggering a full legal audit." He slid a document across the desk toward her. "He left everything to you." Emily did not touch the document. "To me," she said, "to the biological grandchild of Jonathan Blackwood II. By legal definition, that is you and only you." He paused. "Your grandfather never stopped tracking your father's life, even after the estrangement. He knew about you. He knew your name. He made the provision when you were 10 years old. My father knew about this. Yes. He knew. For how long?" Ellison folded his hands on the desk. "Your father was informed of the provision approximately 21 years ago when the trust was formally activated following your grandfather's death. He came to this office. He sat in that same chair. And he told me that he did not want you to know until you were ready. He told me—" Ellison paused, something shifting briefly in his composed expression, "that he did not want money to be the reason anyone came into your life. He said he had watched what wealth did to people who were raised inside it, and he wanted something different for you. He wanted you to know who you were before you learned what you had." Emily pressed both hands flat against her stomach and breathed. "How much?" she said quietly. Ellison turned another page. "The current valuation of the Blackwood Carter Trust, inclusive of compounded returns over 21 years of professionally managed investments across all holdings, is approximately $8.7 billion. The number landed in the room like something dropped from a very great height. Emily did not gasp. She did not cry. She sat very still with her hands on her stomach, and she stared at a point somewhere beyond Richard Ellison's left shoulder, and she breathed in and she breathed out, and she thought about her father clipping coupons on Sunday mornings with scissors that had lost their spring. $8.7 billion. And he packed her lunch every day in a brown paper bag with her name written on it in marker because he did not want her to feel like nobody cared. "Is there anything else in the folder?" she said. Her voice was very steady. She was slightly amazed by how steady it was. Yes. Ellison reached into the folder and removed a single envelope sealed with her name written on the outside in handwriting she would have recognized anywhere. Your father left this with me 11 years ago. He said you would know when to open it. She took the envelope. She held it without opening it. Ms. Carter, Ellison said carefully, I want to be very clear about the legal structure of this trust because I believe, given your current circumstances, it is important for you to understand this immediately. He looked at her steadily. The trust is yours and yours alone. It is protected by ironclad provisions that render it entirely inaccessible to any spouse, former spouse or partner, past, present, or future. It cannot be claimed in any divorce proceeding. It cannot be divided, lined, or touched by any person other than you. Your father structured it that way deliberately. Emily looked at him. He said it again quietly and clearly because he understood that some information needs to be heard twice before it becomes real. No one can take this from you. Not now. Not ever. She left the bank an hour later with a folder of documents under her arm and her father's letter in her coat pocket and $8.7 billion quietly waiting in her name. She stood on the sidewalk on Lexington Avenue, and the city moved around her exactly as it always had, entirely indifferent to the fact that everything had changed, and she pressed her lips together and looked up at the gray November sky and said nothing at all. Then she did something that surprised even herself. She laughed, not the laugh of someone who finds something funny, the laugh of someone who has just understood a joke that was 31 years in the making, a joke told by a man who loved her enough to live in poverty for 3 decades rather than let the world define her by what she was worth before she had the chance to discover who she was. Dad, she said very quietly to the sky and the street and no one in particular, you absolute genius. She took the train home. That evening, Natalie came over. Despite Emily's protests, showed up at the door with soup and bread and the specific determined energy of a woman who has decided that her friend should not be alone right now and is not interested in negotiating about it. Emily let her in. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where the divorce papers had been slapped down less than 48 hours ago. And Emily wrapped both hands around a bowl of soup and looked at her oldest friend and made a decision. I'm going to tell you something, Emily said, and I need you to let me finish before you say anything. Natalie set her spoon down. Okay, Emily told her. Not everything, not the full number, not the legal details, not the name Blackwood, but enough. She told Natalie that her father was not who either of them had thought he was, and that he had left her something, and that she was going to be all right. She told her that she was going to sign the divorce papers, that she was not going to fight Ryan, that she was going to let him go without a single contested word. Natalie stared at her across the table. Emily, you're 7 months pregnant. You can't just, I'm going to be fine. But financially, if he's... Natalie? Emily looked at her steadily. I am going to be fine. Something in her voice stopped the room. Natalie looked at her for a long moment, at the stillness in her posture, the quiet certainty in her eyes, the way she had stopped looking like a woman in crisis and started looking like something else entirely, and slowly closed her mouth. Okay, Natalie said. Okay. That night after Natalie left, Emily sat alone at the kitchen table with her father's letter in front of her. She had been carrying it since morning, turning it over in her coat pocket at intervals throughout the day, like a stone worn smooth by handling. She opened it. The handwriting was his careful, slightly cramped, the handwriting of a man who chose words like he chose tools. It said, My M. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and I am sorry I could not be there to explain in person because there are things that are better said face to face, and this is probably one of them. I want you to know that I never regretted a single day of the life I chose. Not one. Your mother was worth every sacrifice. You were worth every sacrifice. I know you probably have questions I can't answer now. I know you might be angry, and if you are, that's fair. Be angry. Then let it go. The money is not the thing I want you to remember. The money is just money. What I want you to remember is this. I watched you grow up, and every year I watched, I saw someone becoming more decent, more honest, more genuinely good than anyone who grew up surrounded by wealth and comfort and easy living had any reason to be. You earned that, not the fortune yourself. That is what I was protecting. Keep it. Love, Dad." Emily folded the letter and held it against her chest with both hands. Outside, the city hummed and moved and kept going the way cities do. Inside, something in Emily Carter settled into a new position, something foundational, something load-bearing. And she felt for the first time since her father died, not the presence of grief, but the presence of purpose. She was not broken. She had never been broken. She was in the process of becoming exactly who her father had always known she would be. She picked up the divorce papers from where they had been sitting since Wednesday morning, found a pen in the kitchen drawer, and signed her name at the bottom. Clean, unhurried, certain. Ryan Walker wanted a new beginning. She was going to give him exactly what he asked for, and she was going to give herself something far better. 6 months passed, the way months pass after your entire life gets quietly restructured from the inside out. Not slowly, not quickly, but with a kind of relentless, purposeful momentum that doesn't leave much room for looking backward. Emily gave birth to Grace Margaret Carter on a Thursday morning in February, 17 days after the divorce was finalized. She named her after her mother and after the quality her father had spent his whole life demonstrating without ever once naming it. Grace came into the world at 6 pounds 11 ounces, screaming with a conviction that made the delivery nurse laugh, and Emily held her daughter for the first time and felt something lock into place inside her chest that had been loose and uncertain for as long as she could remember. Ryan was not in the hospital. He had been informed. He did not come. Natalie was there. Dorothy, her father's neighbor, drove 3 hours to be in the waiting room. Richard Ellison sent flowers with a card that said simply, "Your father would have been very proud," and Emily read it twice and then folded it and put it in the same drawer where she kept her father's letter. She did not cry about Ryan's absence. She had already done all the crying that particular man was worth, and she had made a private decision somewhere around month 8 of her pregnancy that she was not going to spend any more of herself on someone who had decided she wasn't worth staying for. That decision cost her more than she let anyone see, but she held it the way her father had taught her to hold difficult things quietly, steadily, and without making other people carry it for you. What she did instead of grieving was work. 3 weeks after Grace was born, which her doctor described as optimistic, and Natalie described using several words not appropriate for polite company, Emily began the formal process of activating the Blackwood Carter Trust. She met with Richard Ellison twice a week at first, then 3 times sitting across from him at the oak desk, with Grace asleep in a carrier against her chest, and she learned. She asked questions that surprised him. She pushed back on structures that didn't make sense to her. She requested full documentation on every holding, every subsidiary, every investment vehicle, and she read all of it, not because she had any prior background in finance, but because her father had raised her to understand that the most dangerous position you can be in is the one where you are dependent on someone else's interpretation of your own situation. Ellison told her at the end of their 4th meeting that she had a better grasp of the trust structure than most of the attorneys who had worked on it. "Don't flatter me," she said, adjusting Grace in the carrier. "I'm not," he said, and he meant it. By April, she had made her first major decision. She was going to build something with the money, not just manage it, not just let it grow in accounts she never touched, but build something that her father would have recognized as worthy of the sacrifice he made. Something that did the work he believed in. Something for people who were in the position she had spent her whole life and people who were doing everything right and still being failed by every system designed to catch them when they fell. She called it the Blackwood Carter Foundation. The name was deliberate. She was reclaiming both halves of who she was, the dynasty her father walked away from, and the life he chose instead. She was not ashamed of either. She was done being defined by only one. The foundation's focus was specific and unapologetic. Single mothers, first-generation college scholarships, emergency housing programs for families in crisis, and pediatric health care access in underserved communities. She did not announce it with a press release. She did not hire a publicist. She began writing checks, substantial ones quietly, to organizations that were already doing the work and simply needed the resources to do more of it. Word travels in the nonprofit world. By June, people were starting to talk. By August, the name Blackwood Carter was appearing in places where the name Blackwood had always appeared: boardrooms, charity galas, the kind of private conversations that shape the direction of large amounts of money, but with a completely different energy attached to it. Not the cold, transactional energy of old wealth protecting itself. Something warmer. Something that people couldn't quite categorize, which made them more curious than they would have been if they could. Ryan, during all of this, was living his new beginning. It was not going the way he had imagined. Vanessa Hale's Instagram aesthetic was built for two things: aspiration and acquisition, and Ryan had entered her life at a moment when he represented both. He was presentable. He was professionally credentialed. He photographed well in the kind of restaurants she liked. For approximately 4 months, he was exactly what she needed him to be, and she was exactly what he had convinced himself he deserved: beautiful, socially polished, entirely certain of her own value in every room she walked into. The problem was that Ryan had made the fundamental error of confusing someone's performance of confidence with the actual substance of it, and Vanessa had made the corresponding error of confusing someone's appearance of ambition with actual drive. By month 5, they were having arguments that started about restaurant reservations and ended somewhere much uglier and more revealing. By month 6, Vanessa had begun spending increasing amounts of time with a tech entrepreneur she had met at a brand event in Miami, and Ryan had begun to notice the specific way she looked at her phone when she thought he wasn't watching. He said nothing about it. He was not in a position to say anything about it. He had given up his moral authority in that department on a Wednesday morning when he slid divorce papers across a kitchen table to his pregnant wife and walked out the door. What he did instead was begin very quietly to think about Emily. Not with remorse, or not primarily with remorse, not yet. More with a slowly growing unease, the kind that starts as a small pressure somewhere behind the sternum and expands incrementally as more information arrives to feed it. He had heard things, fragments from mutual acquaintances, from LinkedIn, from the ambient social information that circulates through interconnected professional worlds, whether you seek it out or not. He had heard that Emily was involved with some kind of charitable foundation. He had heard the name Blackwood attached to it and not known what to make of that. He had heard from someone who knew someone that she seemed well. Better than well. He told himself it didn't matter. He told himself this quite frequently. It was not working. The invitation arrived in October. It was printed on heavy cream paper, the kind that has texture you can feel, and it arrived at Emily's address. The new one, a townhouse in the West Village that she had purchased in September, quietly without fanfare. And it was from the Harrington Society, one of the oldest philanthropic organizations in New York, requesting the honor of her presence as the guest of honor at their annual winter gala to be held at the Plaza Hotel on the 15th of November, at which the Blackwood Carter Foundation would be formally introduced to New York's philanthropic community. Emily held the invitation and looked at it for a moment, and then set it on the kitchen counter and went to check on Grace, who was 9 months old and had recently discovered the specific satisfaction of pulling things off low shelves. "What do you think?" Emily said, picking up her daughter and settling her on her hip. "Fancy party." Grace grabbed her mother's necklace with both hands and pulled. "Yeah," Emily said. "That's what I thought too." She called Ellison. "I'll be there," she said. "Good," he said. "There are people who need to meet you, and more importantly, there are people who need to understand what the Blackwood Carter Foundation is and where it intends to go. This is the right room for that conversation." She paused. "Will Ryan be there?" A beat. "His firm was invited. It's a broad guest list." "Okay," she said. "Emily." "I said okay, Richard. I'm not afraid of a room." He was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "You're not. That's why this is going to go the way it's going to go." She did not ask him what he meant by that. She already knew. November 15th arrived, the way significant dates tend to arrive, preceded by a week that moves too fast and a morning that moves too slow. Emily spent the day with Grace, unhurried, deliberate, the way she spent most days, now that she had the extraordinary luxury of choosing how to use her time. She fed her daughter breakfast and took her to the park and read to her in the afternoon, and when Dorothy arrived at 6 to stay with the baby, Emily got ready with the specific quiet focus of a person who understands that what they are about to walk into matters. She wore midnight blue, simple cut, elegant, nothing performative. Her hair was down. She wore her father's watch, a plain stainless steel watch he had bought at a department store sale 20 years ago and worn every day until he died on her left wrist. Ellison had offered to arrange something more appropriate for the occasion. She had declined without discussion. The watch was the point. The car arrived at 7:45. She rode alone, looking out the window at the city moving past in the November dark, and she thought about her father sitting in his recliner with his coffee cup saying, "Go to the bank." And she pressed her lips together and felt the specific bittersweet ache of a person who wishes the person they most want to share something with could be there to see it. "I'm going, Dad," she said quietly to the window. "Watch." The Plaza Ballroom was everything such rooms are: large, luminous, full of the particular energy of people who have spent considerable effort appearing effortless. 340 guests, according to the event coordinator, who greeted her at the entrance. Senators, CEOs, foundation directors, journalists, the specific category of person who shows up at events like this, both to be seen and to see what they need to know next. Emily walked in. She did not make an entrance in the theatrical sense. She simply arrived, and something in the quality of her arrival, the stillness of her posture, the unhurried way she moved through the room, the particular combination of complete comfort and complete authority created a ripple that she could feel but did not acknowledge. People turned, some because they recognized the name on the evening's program, some because they were responding to something they couldn't have named if asked. She accepted a glass of water from a passing tray and began moving through the room, and within 6 minutes, she had been approached by 4 people who wanted to discuss the foundation, 2 who wanted to discuss the Blackwood family legacy, and 1 congresswoman from Massachusetts who shook her hand with both of hers and said, "Your father would have been extraordinary in any life he chose. He chose the most important one." Emily looked at her steadily. "Yes," she said, "he did." Across the room, Ryan Walker arrived at 8:15, with Vanessa on his arm, though the specific quality of tension between them suggested that Arm was performing a function that was more logistical than romantic. He saw Emily within 3 minutes. She was talking to this president of a major hospital network, laughing at something he said, Grace's absence from her hip somehow making the space around her feel larger rather than smaller, and she was wearing midnight blue, and she looked. Ryan stopped walking and stood very still for a moment. She looked like someone he did not recognize, not because she had changed her appearance, because something had changed in the architecture of her, something underneath the surface. Vanessa followed his gaze. Her eyes narrowed. "Who is that?" she said. "That's Emily," Ryan said. "A beat." "Your ex-wife." "Yes." Vanessa looked at Emily. Then she looked at the circle of people around her, the hospital president, a senator's chief of staff, 2 foundation directors, and something shifted in her expression that Ryan did not know how to read and did not particularly want to. "She seems to know a lot of important people," Vanessa said. Ryan said nothing. The program began at 9 o'clock. The guests took their seats at round tables arranged across the ballroom floor, and the Harrington Society's director took the podium and spoke for 12 minutes about the history of the organization and the particular significance of this evening. Then she said, "Before I introduce our guest of honor, I want to share with you a story because I believe context matters, and because I believe the person you are about to meet has earned the right to be understood fully." The room settled. "Most of you know the name Blackwood," the director said. "You know it as one of the oldest private fortunes in American history. You know it as shipping, aviation, technology, real estate. You know it as a name that has shaped significant portions of the American economy for 3 generations. She paused. "What most of you do not know is what happened to that name 35 years ago." Ryan put his water glass down. The director told the story the way Ellison had told it to Emily 9 months earlier, quietly, methodically, without theatrics. And the room listened with the specific quality of attention that 340 people give to a story that rearranges something they thought they already understood. She told them about Jonathan Blackwood III, about the woman he loved, about the choice he made, about the name he took and the life he built and the daughter he raised in a small South Boston apartment on a janitor's salary while $8.7 billion waited in a trust with her name on it. Somewhere in the middle of this, Ryan Walker understood what he was hearing. The color left his face in stages. The janitor, the director, said that most of the world walked past without a second glance was one of the wealthiest men in America. He simply chose not to be. She looked out at the room, and his daughter, who grew up not knowing any of this, who was raised with nothing but the values her father built into her before she ever learned what she had. She gestured toward the table at the front of the room where Emily sat, with her hands folded and her expression calm. Jiao Tsa is tonight the sole successor to the Blackwood family legacy and the founder of one of the most significant new philanthropic enterprises in this country. The room erupted, not in the polished, restrained way of formal events, in the uncontrolled, involuntary way of 340 people who have simultaneously received information that short-circuits their social composure. There was applause, yes, but also the particular electric murmur of a crowd that is rapidly recalculating everything they thought they knew about the woman sitting in midnight blue at the front of the room. Emily stood. She walked to the podium. She looked out at the room with the same steady composure she had carried into Ellison's office 9 months ago, into the hospital where Grace was born, into every meeting and every hard morning and every moment when being the person her father raised her to be had required more than she thought she had. She said, "My father packed my lunch every day in a brown paper bag with my name written on it in marker. He did it so I would know that someone in the world was paying attention to me. So I would know I was not invisible." She paused. He spent 35 years paying attention to everyone around him who needed it and letting the rest of the world walk past without knowing his name. I think that is the most extraordinary thing I have ever heard of anyone doing. And the foundation I am building in his name is going to try to do the same thing. Pay attention to the people the world walks past. Fund the work of the people who are already paying attention. Make sure that the next little girl growing up in a small apartment with a parent who loves her more than she knows never has to find out too late that she was never as alone as she thought. She stopped. The room was silent for 3 full seconds. Then it wasn't. Ryan Walker did not applaud. He sat with his hands flat on the table and his face a color that had no good name for it. And he looked at the woman at the podium, the woman he had handed divorce papers to while she was still wearing funeral black. The woman he had left in a kitchen with a shattered coffee mug and a 7-month belly and not once looked back at, and he understood. With the full and terrible clarity of someone who has just watched the consequences of their own choices, assembled in front of an audience of 340 people exactly what he had done. It was not the money. He kept telling himself it was the money, that the shock was about the money, but that was not what was sitting in his chest like something broken and irretrievable. It was the look on her face at the podium, completely at peace, not performing peace, not wearing peace like a costume assembled for this evening, actually genuinely structurally at peace, the way a person is at peace when they have done the hard internal work and come out the other side of it, carrying something that cannot be taken from them. She was not looking at him. She was not looking for him. She had not looked for him once the entire evening. Vanessa leaned close to Ryan and said in a voice pitched low enough for only him to hear, "She's worth how much?" Ryan did not answer. "Ryan." Vanessa's voice had a new quality in it, something assessing, something recalculating. "How much did you say she—" "Stop," he said. Vanessa stopped. She looked at him. Then she looked at Emily again, at the crowd pressing forward to speak with her, at the energy in the room that had reorganized itself entirely around one woman in midnight blue with a plain steel watch on her wrist. And Ryan sat alone in the middle of 340 people and felt for the first time in his adult life the specific and unambiguous weight of a choice that cannot be unmade. He had looked at Emily Carter and seen a burden. He had looked at her and calculated liability, the pregnant wife of a quiet, dead janitor, the woman from nothing, the woman who needed too much and offered too little. He had been so certain. He had been so catastrophically, irreversibly wrong. After the program ended and the room broke into smaller conversations, Emily moved through the crowd with the deliberate ease of a woman who has decided exactly who she is and is not interested in renegotiating. People approached her continuously. She spoke to each of them with the same focused attention her father had given to everyone in his life, fully present, unhurried, like they were the only person in the room. At 10:53, she turned, and for one brief, unavoidable moment, she and Ryan occupied the same sight line across the ballroom floor. He looked at her. His expression was something she had never seen on his face before, stripped of the confidence that had always been his primary armor, stripped of the calculation that lived just behind his eyes, stripped of everything down to something raw and undefended and very late. Emily looked at him for exactly 3 seconds. Then she turned back to the woman she had been speaking with, a pediatric surgeon from Brooklyn, who was telling her about a clinic that had been fighting to stay funded for 6 years. And she said, "Tell me what you need. Specifically, let's start there." She did not look back. She never looked back. The morning after the gala, Ryan Walker woke up at 5:47 and lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and did not move for a very long time. Vanessa was asleep beside him, or she was pretending to be asleep, which had become increasingly difficult to distinguish from the real thing. Either way, she was quiet, and the quiet gave Ryan's mind exactly the space it did not want: the open, unguarded silence of early morning, where the things you have been successfully avoiding during daylight hours come and sit on your chest and refuse to be polite about it. $8.7 billion. He had known the number by 11 o'clock the previous evening because Vanessa had excused herself to the restroom at the gala and come back 23 minutes later, having clearly done thorough research on her phone, and she had leaned close to him at the table and said the number in a voice that was attempting to be neutral and landing somewhere between awe and fury. He had not responded. There was nothing to say that did not make everything worse. What kept returning to him, and this surprised him in the dim honesty of 5:47 in the morning, was not the number. It was her face. Emily's face at the podium when she talked about her father packing her lunch in a brown paper bag with her name written on it so she would know someone was paying attention. The way her voice did not break when she said it. The way she stood at that podium, like someone who had walked through a significant amount of fire and come out not hardened but clarified, like the fire had burned away everything that wasn't essential and left only what was real. He had never once made Emily feel like someone was paying attention. He understood that now, with the specific, sickening clarity of understanding that arrives exactly one act of irreversible consequence, too late. He got up at 6:15 because lying there was becoming intolerable, made coffee in the kitchen, and stood at the counter drinking it and looking at nothing. His phone had 17 notifications. He did not look at any of them. He had a feeling they were not going to improve his morning. At 6:42, Vanessa came into the kitchen. She was dressed, fully dressed, with her overnight bag over her shoulder, which meant she had made a decision sometime in the last hour that she had not yet verbalized. Ryan looked at her. "Going somewhere. I have a brand thing in the city," she said. She set her bag down and poured herself coffee and leaned against the counter across from him and looked at him with an expression he had seen on her face before, the assessing look, the one that meant she was calculating something and was close to a conclusion. "Say what you want to say, Vanessa." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How long did you know about the money?" Ryan put his mug down. "I didn't know." "You were married to her for 4 years." "I didn't know," he said again. "Her father was a janitor. She grew up with nothing. There was nothing to know." Vanessa looked at him steadily. "Except apparently there was $8.7 billion to know." "I didn't know that." "But you left her anyway." She tilted her head slightly. "You left her while she was pregnant, the day after her father's funeral. You had already filed before he was even buried." Ryan said nothing. "I'm not judging you," Vanessa said in the tone of someone who is absolutely judging him. "I'm just trying to understand the timeline, because what I watched last night was a woman who has clearly figured out exactly who she is in front of 300 people who are now entirely prepared to help her do whatever she wants to do next. And I'm sitting here trying to figure out what that makes us." "What does that mean?" "It means," she picked up her bag again, "that I have been thinking, And I think I have been thinking for a while, actually, that you and I want different things. And last night sort of made that very clear to me. She looked at him directly. You want to look successful. I want to actually be successful. Those are not the same thing, and I don't think we figured that out before we should have. Ryan stared at her. Are you breaking up with me? He said. I'm clarifying our direction, she said. But they both knew what it was. She left at 7:15. Ryan stood in his kitchen alone for the second time in less than a year and felt the particular quality of silence that follows when someone you thought was the answer to something turns out to be a different version of the same question. He picked up his phone. He had a text from his business partner Marcus sent at 11:40 the previous night that said simply, "Dude, call me." He called him. Marcus picked up on the second ring. "Tell me you knew," Marcus said immediately. No greeting, no preamble. "Tell me you knew about Emily and you had some kind of plan, because if you didn't know, I don't know what to tell you, man." "I didn't know," Ryan said. A long pause. "She's worth nearly $9 billion, Ryan." "I know." "And you filed for divorce the morning her father died." "I know." "And then you posted a photo with Vanessa on Instagram the same week." Marcus. "I'm not trying to pile on," Marcus said, his voice shifting into something more careful and more genuine. "I'm your friend, but I need you to understand what people are saying because it's going to affect the firm. The gala was covered. There's a piece in the Times this morning about the foundation, and it mentions not directly, but it mentions the circumstances of the marriage ending. People are connecting dots, Ryan. People who matter to our business are connecting dots." Ryan sat down. "What kind of piece?" "The kind that makes Emily Carter look like the most extraordinary person in any room she walks into and makes anyone who underestimated her look like—" Marcus paused. "Just read it." He read it. It was not a hit piece. It did not name Ryan. It did not need to. It told the story of Harold Carter, of Jonathan Blackwood III, of the choice. A man made 35 years ago, and the daughter he raised to be exactly who she turned out to be, and it ended with a paragraph about the Blackwood Carter Foundation's inaugural commitments, $12 million distributed across 7 organizations in the first 6 months, with a $100 million endowment announced the previous evening at the gala. $12 million in 6 months, quietly, without a single press release. Ryan put his phone face down on the table and pressed both hands flat against it and breathed. He tried in the weeks that followed to reach Emily. He was not sure himself what he intended to say. He told himself it was about Grace, that his daughter was 3 months old and he had not been present, and that was a legitimate separate issue from everything else. He told himself that much was true, regardless of the rest of it. He sent a text message on a Tuesday evening that said, "I'd like to talk about Grace when you're ready." He waited 4 days. Emily's response when it came was a single line, "My attorney will be in touch about a visitation schedule." That was all. He stared at those 11 words for a long time. They were not cruel. They were not cold in the way of someone performing coldness. They were simply the words of a person who had established exactly where the boundary was and was content to let it stand there without drama or negotiation. He texted back, "I meant I'd like to talk to you, not through lawyers." She did not respond. He called. It went to voicemail. He left a message that he spent 20 minutes rehearsing, and that still came out wrong. Too defensive at the beginning, too apologetic at the end, with a middle section that even he could hear was really about him and not about Grace at all. She did not call back. He called again the following Wednesday, and the Wednesday after that. He sent 2 emails that he drafted and redrafted until they bore almost no resemblance to the first versions, and that still, when he read them back, sounded like a man trying to talk his way out of something, rather than a man genuinely trying to make something right. She did not respond to the emails. Her attorney contacted his attorney with a formal visitation proposal, structured, generous, clearly drafted by someone who wanted to ensure that Grace had access to her father without using that access as a bargaining chip for anything else. Every other weekend beginning at month 4, alternating holidays, a process for expanding the schedule as Grace grew. It was objectively more than Ryan had asked for, and more than he had any right to expect. He signed it. He showed up for the first visit. Grace looked at him with the large, dark, completely unguarded eyes of a 4-month-old who has not yet learned that some people require caution, and she grabbed his finger with her whole fist. And Ryan Walker, who had not cried in front of another person since he was 11 years old, had to turn his face away from the social worker supervising the visit and breathe very deliberately through his nose for approximately 30 seconds. Emily was not present for the handoff. Natalie brought Grace to the arranged location and took her back afterward and was pleasant and professional in the way of someone who has been specifically asked to be pleasant and professional and is doing it out of respect for a request rather than out of any personal inclination toward generosity in this particular situation. "How is she?" Ryan said when Natalie arrived to pick Grace up after the first visit. Natalie looked at him. "She's well," she said. "I mean, really. How is she actually?" Natalie considered him for a moment. She was not a woman who said things carelessly, and she was not a woman who said things kindly when honest would serve better. "She's the best I've ever seen her," she said finally, "and I've known her for 20 years, so—" She picked up Grace and buckled her into the carrier with practiced efficiency. "That's your answer." Ryan watched her walk to the car. "The best I've ever seen her." He drove home alone and sat in the parking garage of his building for 11 minutes before he could make himself go inside. The professional consequences Marcus had warned him about arrived gradually the way professional consequences usually do not, as a single event, but as a slow accumulation of temperature changes. A firm they had been in discussions with for a potential partnership quietly redirected. A speaking invitation that had seemed certain did not materialize. 2 clients who had been in the process of expanding their accounts with Ryan's firm elected instead to maintain their existing level. None of it was documented. None of it was stated explicitly. It was the specific, invisible social mechanics of a world where reputation is currency and information travels faster than anyone admits. Marcus brought it up at a partners meeting in January carefully in the language of business. "We need to think about the optics of the last few months," he said, looking at Ryan across the conference table. "Not accusatorially, practically. The Blackwood Carter Foundation is going to be one of the most visible philanthropic organizations in the country within 3 years. Emily Carter is going to be a significant public figure, and the story of how that marriage ended is now part of the public record in a way that is going to keep being relevant." Ryan looked at him. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that how you handle your relationship with Grace going forward is the only thing you actually have control over in this situation. And I'm suggesting you focus there, entirely and without reservation." Marcus paused. "Everything else is done. The only chapter you can still write is the one where you show up for your daughter." It was the most direct thing Marcus had ever said to him. It was also the most useful. Ryan thought about it for a long time after the meeting ended. He thought about it driving home and making dinner alone in a kitchen that echoed and falling asleep in an apartment that was expensively furnished and completely empty of anything that felt like it mattered. He thought about Emily standing at the podium saying, "I want to make sure the next little girl growing up in a small apartment with a parent who loves her more than she knows never has to find out too late that she was never as alone as she thought." He thought about Grace's fist around his finger. He called his attorney the following morning and requested a mediation session to discuss modifying the visitation arrangement not to reduce Emily's primary custody, but to increase his own commitment. More consistent visits, more structure, demonstrated reliability over time rather than grand gestures. His attorney sounded faintly surprised. "You want more time with her?" the attorney said. "Not less." "Yes," Ryan said. "That's what I said." He began showing up. Every scheduled visit without exception, regardless of what else was happening professionally or personally. He showed up when Grace had a cold and was miserable, and not particularly interested in being held by someone she was still in the process of learning to recognize. He showed up when she was happy and wide awake and grabbing at everything within reach. He showed up when it was raining and when it was inconvenient, and when the drive took 45 minutes in traffic and he arrived tired and sat on the floor and played with stacking rings for an hour because that was what Grace wanted to do. He was not doing it to prove anything to Emily. He understood slowly and painfully that there was nothing he could prove to Emily, and that trying to use Grace as a vehicle for that kind of proof would be the same category of mistake as everything that had come before it, treating a person as a means to something, rather than an end in herself. He was doing it because Grace was his daughter, and she deserved a father who showed up. It was the first genuinely unselfish decision Ryan Walker had made in longer than he could honestly account for, and it felt in the specific way of things that are right, but not easy. Like trying to use a muscle that had not been exercised in years. Effortful and slightly unfamiliar, but with the particular satisfaction of something that is working exactly as it was designed to. Vanessa, meanwhile, had posted 3 times since the morning she left with her overnight bag. The posts were carefully curated, as all her posts were aspirational, beautifully lit, geographically various. She was in Tulum in one, London in another. She looked exactly as she always looked, which was to say excellent. And she said in a caption on the London Post that she was entering her expansion era and was grateful for everyone who had ever shown her what she did not want, because it helped her find what she did. Ryan read the caption. He put his phone down. He did not feel what he would have expected to feel, which was either hurt or anger. He felt something closer to recognition, the same recognition he had felt reading Emily's attorney's 11-word text message. The recognition of someone who is looking at the consequences of a long pattern of choices and finally seeing the pattern clearly enough to name it. He had spent his adult life optimizing for the appearance of success, for the look of the life he wanted, rather than the substance of it. He had chosen Vanessa because she photographed well and moved through rooms with confidence. He had married Emily because she was steady and capable and made his life run smoothly, and he had left her when he convinced himself that steady and capable was the same thing as small. He had looked at everything and everyone through the lens of what they could contribute to the version of himself he was constructing, and he had been so committed to that construction that he had failed to notice, until it was far too late, that he had built it on a foundation of other people's actual lives. Grace's birthday fell on a Thursday in February, her first. Ryan sent a gift 3 days early, something thoughtful, age-appropriate, chosen without Natalie's input, because he had been paying attention at the visits, and he knew what Grace liked. He included a card that said simply, "Happy first birthday, Grace. I love you, Dad." He did not include a message for Emily. He did not make the card into something it wasn't. Natalie texted him a photo that evening of Grace sitting on the floor of what looked like Emily's kitchen, the wrapping paper from his gift pulled apart around her, holding the toy with both hands, and looking at it with the focused intensity that babies bring to objects they find genuinely interesting. He saved the photo. He looked at it for a long time. In the year since the gala, the Blackwood Carter Foundation had funded the renovation of 3 pediatric clinics, established scholarship programs at 11 universities, broken ground on a transitional housing complex for single-parent families in the Bronx, and committed to a $25 million partnership with a network of domestic violence support organizations across 6 states. Emily had given 2 interviews, both to print outlets. Both focused entirely on the work of the foundation, rather than her personal story. And in both of them she spoke about her father with the specific reverence of someone who understands they are carrying something that was given to them by someone who paid a very high price for it. She did not mention Ryan in either interview. She did not mention him at all to anyone in any context that reached him through any channel. He was not erased. He simply was not relevant to the story she was telling, which was in its own way the most complete and permanent form of closure available. In March, Ryan ran into a colleague at a conference in Chicago, a man named David Park, who had known both him and Emily peripherally during the marriage, and David, who was 3 drinks into the evening and had apparently decided that social filters were optional, said, "Man, I saw Emily at an event in January. She's something else now. I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean she walks into a room and you understand immediately that something significant is about to happen." He looked at Ryan with the candid, slightly uncomfortable directness of a man who is saying something he knows might land badly, but can't quite stop himself from saying. "I always thought she was capable of something like that. I never thought she'd get the chance to show it." A pause. I guess losing the right thing can sometimes be the beginning of the right thing for the person who had it. Ryan looked at his drink. "Yeah," he said. "I think that's right." David looked at him for a moment, seemed to realize what he'd said and to whom, and changed the subject. But Ryan sat with it for the rest of the evening and on the flight home and in the car from the airport and standing in his kitchen at midnight making toast because he wasn't hungry but needed something to do with his hands. Losing the right thing can sometimes be the beginning of the right thing for the person who had it. He thought about Grace's fist around his finger. That much at least he had not entirely lost. That much, if he was consistent and patient and genuinely present rather than strategically present, he might still be able to build into something real. It was not redemption. He understood that. Redemption was a clean arc, and this was not going to be a clean arc. This was going to be the slow, unglamorous daily work of becoming someone Grace could be proud of without any guarantee of anything except the work itself. He went to bed. He set his alarm for 6 because Grace's visit was Saturday, and he had promised himself, not to anyone else, just to himself, in the quiet where promises mean the most, that he was never going to be the father who canceled. 6 years is a long time, and also no time at all depending on what you are measuring. 6 years after Ryan Walker slammed divorce papers onto a kitchen table and walked out the door without looking back. The world that Emily Carter moved through bore almost no resemblance to the one she had inhabited then, and yet the most essential thing about her, the thing her father had spent 31 years building into her before she ever learned she was rich, remained exactly what it had always been, unchanged, uncompromised, load-bearing. Grace. Margaret Carter turned 6 on a Thursday in February and woke up at 6:15 in the morning and came into her mother's room at a pace that could only be described as purposeful, climbed onto the bed with the focused determination of someone who has important business to conduct, and put both small hands on Emily's face. "Mama, it's my birthday." Emily opened one eye. "Is it?" "It is. I checked." "You checked?" "I looked at the calendar on the refrigerator. It says February 13, that's today. Today is my birthday." Emily pulled her daughter down onto the bed and held her, and Grace squirmed for approximately 4 seconds before deciding that being held was acceptable and settling into her mother's arms with the unself-conscious ease of a child who has never had reason to doubt that she is exactly where she is supposed to be. Emily pressed her face into her daughter's hair and breathed. 6 years. She thought about a hospital room in February 6 years ago, and a 6-pound, 11-ounce person screaming with conviction, and the feeling of something locking into place in her chest that had been loose for as long as she could remember. She thought about Ryan not being there, and how at the time that absence had carried a specific weight that she'd had to actively work, not to let define the moment. She thought about how completely that weight had dissolved, not through effort. Not through forcing herself past it, but simply through the accumulated evidence of 6 years of building something real. The weight of his absence had been replaced gradually and then completely by the substance of everything that was present. "What do you want for your birthday breakfast?" Emily said into Grace's hair. "Pancakes with the blueberries inside, not on top." "Inside, not on top. Got it. And can we call Grandpa Richard?" Emily smiled. Ellison had become over 6 years of twice-weekly meetings that had gradually shifted in character from professional to something considerably warmer, a fixture in Grace's life that neither of them had planned, and both of them had accepted without discussion. He had taught Grace to play chess at age 4, which her kindergarten teacher had described as alarming and impressive in equal measure. He sent her books with notes written in the margins. He showed up to her birthday every year with a gift chosen with the specific care of a man who takes a child's interests seriously. "We can absolutely call Grandpa Richard," Emily said. Grace was satisfied. She climbed off the bed and went to get dressed because she had opinions about her birthday outfit and needed time to execute them, and Emily lay still for a moment in the quiet of the early morning and let herself feel the full, uncomplicated weight of gratitude. She was happy. Not performing happiness, not managing a carefully constructed approximation of it. Actually genuinely structurally happy in the way that her father had been happy in his small apartment with his coupons and his cracked sole work boot, not because everything was easy, but because everything was true. By 9 o'clock, the townhouse was alive with the specific energy of Grace's birthday, which always involved a level of organizational enthusiasm from Grace herself that Emily had come to recognize as one of her daughter's most characteristic qualities. At 6 years old, Grace Carter was deliberate, curious, slightly bossy in the way of people who simply know what they want and see no reason to be indirect about it, and possessed of a quality of focused attention that made adults feel, when she turned it on them, that they were the most interesting thing she had encountered recently. She had her grandfather's eyes, dark and steady and slightly older than her face. Emily noticed it every single day, and it never once stopped being a gift. Natalie arrived at 10 with a cake box and the energy of someone who has been best friends with someone for 26 years and treats their child's birthday with the seriousness it deserves. She set the box down, hugged Grace with the exuberance that Grace endured graciously, and then looked at Emily over Grace's head with an expression that said, "There is something I need to tell you, and I am going to tell you the moment this child is distracted." Grace was distracted approximately 4 minutes later by the discovery that the cake had her name written on it in purple, which was the correct color, and Emily drifted to the kitchen doorway where Natalie was already waiting. "What?" Emily said quietly. Natalie pulled out her phone. "There's a piece. It went up this morning. Financial Times Online Edition." She handed Emily the phone. Someone talked. One of the Blackwood family attorneys, they think. It's about the trust, about the full scope of what the foundation has done in 6 years. And it mentions... She paused. It goes into the marriage, more specifically than anything that's been published before. Emily read it. It was thorough. The reporter had done genuine work, the kind that takes months of sourcing and verification. It traced the full arc of the Blackwood family history, Harold Carter's real identity, the trust structure, the foundation's growth over 6 years. The numbers it cited were accurate because they were on public record. The foundation had in 6 years distributed $430 million across programs in 22 states, established the largest single-parent scholarship endowment in the country, funded the construction of 14 transitional housing facilities, and partnered with hospital networks in 9 cities to provide pediatric care to families who could not otherwise access it. The marriage was addressed in 4 paragraphs near the middle of the piece factual and without editorializing, but 4 paragraphs of fact were sufficient to make the sequence of events unmistakably clear to anyone reading. The filing date of the divorce petition, the date of her father's funeral, the Instagram post. Emily handed the phone back to Natalie. "Okay," she said. Natalie looked at her. "That's it? Okay. What would you like me to say?" "I don't know, maybe something. It's a major piece, Emily. It's going to get picked up everywhere. By tonight, this is going to be..." "Natalie." Emily said it gently, but with the specific finality of someone who has made a decision long ago and is not revisiting it. "The story is true. Every fact in it is accurate. I have nothing to manage, and nothing to correct, and nothing to add. The foundation's work speaks for itself. My father's story speaks for itself." She glanced into the other room where Grace was explaining to the cake why purple was the best color. "My life speaks for itself." Natalie looked at her for a long moment. Then she exhaled. "You are genuinely the most composed human being I have ever met, and it is sometimes very annoying." "I know," Emily said. "Cake." Ryan read the piece at 11:43 that morning, sitting in his car in the parking lot outside the toy store where he had just bought Grace's birthday gift. He had read the headline on his phone and then sat in the car and read the entire thing slowly, without skipping anything. He read the 4 paragraphs about the marriage. He sat in the parking lot for a while afterward. His phone buzzed 3 times in the space of 5 minutes. Marcus, a college friend. A number he didn't recognize. He didn't answer any of them. He already knew what they wanted to say, and he had no useful response to any of it because there was no response. The facts were the facts. He had done what he had done. It was in print now in a way that was permanent and widely distributed, and there was absolutely nothing to be done about it except continue doing the only thing that was actually in his control. He picked up Grace's gift from the back seat and drove to the agreed handoff location. Natalie was there as usual. Grace came running toward him the moment she saw him, which still 2 years into consistent visits, 2 years of never canceling, 2 years of being exactly where he said he would be, hit him in the chest in a way he had never found a way to prepare for. "Daddy, it's my birthday." Grace announced, as if this was information she suspected he might not have. "I heard a rumor," he said, crouching down to her level. "Happy birthday, Bug." She grabbed his face with both hands, a gesture so precisely like the one she had performed on Emily that morning, though neither of them knew it, and looked at him with her serious dark eyes. "Did you bring me something?" "Grace," Natalie said from behind her. "It's a valid question," Grace said without looking away from Ryan. Ryan laughed. "A real one, not performed." "Yeah," he said. "I brought you something." He handed her the gift. She assessed the wrapping with the focused attention she brought to everything, then began dismantling it with efficient purpose. He glanced up at Natalie. She was watching Grace with the warmth of someone who has loved a child since before the child could hold their own head up. And when she felt Ryan looking at her, she met his eyes briefly. And what passed between them was not warmth exactly. They were not at warmth yet, and might not ever be. And that was appropriate, but something functional and respectful and adult. The acknowledgement of two people who are both committed to the same small person's well-being and have found a way to make that the thing that matters. "She's been talking about seeing you since Tuesday," Natalie said. Ryan looked back at Grace, who had gotten the wrapping off and was examining the gift with intense concentration. Yeah. A pause. "You're doing good, Ryan. With her. Just you're doing good." He nodded. He didn't say anything because there wasn't anything to say that wouldn't have diminished it. 3 weeks after Grace's birthday on a Sunday morning in early March, Emily drove alone to South Boston for the first time in 2 years. She had thought about this visit for several months, turning it over in the way she turned over things that mattered carefully from multiple angles, waiting until she understood her own reasons clearly enough to trust them. She parked on the street outside the building where she had grown up and sat in the car for a moment, with the engine off and the march quiet around her. Then she went inside and up the stairs and stood at the door of the apartment her father had lived in for the last 18 years of his life. The current tenant, a young woman named Rosa, who worked as a home health aide and had a daughter in 3rd grade, had responded to Emily's letter with a generosity Emily had not expected, and the door opened before she could knock. "I kept everything the way it was when I moved in," Rosa said. "The landlord said the previous tenant had been there a long time. It felt like someone loved this place. I didn't want to change it." Emily stood in the doorway and looked at the apartment and felt the full, complicated weight of what it means to return to a place that shaped you. Everything was the same. The recliner, the small bookcase, the kitchen table with the chairs her father had re-glued twice because he refused to replace anything that could be repaired. The window with the particular quality of morning light she had grown up measuring time by. Rosa left her alone quietly, the way you leave someone alone when you understand they need the room to themselves. Emily moved through the apartment, slowly touching things without picking them up the way you move through a place where everything is both ordinary and sacred. She ran her hand along the kitchen counter. She stood in the doorway of the small bedroom that had been hers and looked at the wall where her father had measured her height every birthday with a pencil and her name and the date, and she saw the marks were still there. Rosa had painted around them carefully, leaving the column of pencil lines and dates intact on their strip of original wall. Emily pressed 2 fingers against the highest mark. Emily. June 18th, 16 years old. She stood there for a long time. Then she went to the recliner and sat in it the way her father had sat in it 10,000 times. And she reached into her coat pocket and took out the letter she had carried there since the morning she read it 18 months after he died, folded and refolded until the paper had gone soft at the creases. She already knew every word. She had read it more times than she could count. But she read it again here in his chair in his apartment in the March morning light that came through his window. Loss is not punishment. It is permission. Permission to become who you were always meant to be. She folded the letter and held it in both hands and sat quietly for a while. She thought about the bank on Lexington Avenue, the brown folder with worn edges, Richard Ellison's careful voice saying, "No one can take this from you. Not now, not ever." She thought about signing the divorce papers at the kitchen table, clean and unhurried and certain. She thought about the gala, the midnight blue dress, the plain steel watch, the podium, 300 people going silent. She thought about Grace's face the first time she laughed. which had been at 3 months old at something Emily had done with her hands, and how that laugh had been the most significant sound she had ever heard. She thought about her father sitting in this very chair clipping coupons with scissors that had lost their spring while $8.7 billion sat in a vault with her name on it. She thought about what kind of man does that? What kind of love that requires? What kind of faith in a person in who they could become if given the chance to become it on their own terms that demands? And she understood sitting in his chair in the March quiet, something she had been circling for 6 years without landing on it cleanly. Her father's sacrifice was not actually a sacrifice. That was the thing she had been missing. She had framed it as sacrifice as the thing he gave up, and that framing, while not wrong, was incomplete. Because Jonathan Blackwood III had not walked away from a fortune because he felt compelled to do something difficult. He had walked away because he understood with a clarity that most people never achieve about anything that the life he was walking toward was more valuable than the one he was leaving. Not more comfortable, not easier, more valuable. The life where he loved a woman who deserved to be loved without conditions, where he raised a daughter with his own hands and his own presence, where he got to decide every single day what kind of person he was going to be, not based on what he had inherited or what others expected of him, but based on what he actually believed. He had not lost a fortune. He had traded a fortune for a life. And he had decided somewhere in the calculation that his daughter deserved to have both the life built on values and the resources to extend those values as far as they could reach. He had spent 30 years engineering exactly that outcome patiently and invisibly, with the particular genius of someone who understands that the best things you do for the people you love are the ones they don't see until they're ready to see them. Emily sat in the recliner and pressed her lips together, and felt the specific, bittersweet ache of understanding something fully for the first time when the person who could hear you tell them, you understand, it is no longer there to hear. "I got it, Dad," she said quietly to the apartment and the light and the column of pencil marks on the wall. "I finally got it." She stayed for another hour. She thanked Rosa at the door and pressed an envelope into her hands, the letter from her attorney that she had prepared before coming, confirming that the apartment's rent would be fully covered for as long as Rosa and her daughter needed it, with no conditions and no expiration date. Rosa looked at her, and then at the envelope, and then back at her, and said in a voice that was not quite steady, "Why are you doing this?" "Because someone paid attention to me when I needed it," Emily said. "And I'm paying it forward." She drove back to Manhattan with the March morning around her, and Grace's voice on the car speaker Natalie had called to report that Grace had eaten approximately half her body weight in leftover birthday cake for breakfast and was experiencing no regrets. And Emily laughed, really laughed, the kind that comes from the part of you that is simply and uncomplicated glad to be alive. The Foundation's 7-year report was released in April. $430 million distributed, 14 housing facilities. The scholarship endowment that had in 6 years sent 943 first-generation students to universities they could not otherwise have afforded. The Pediatric Clinic Network. The Domestic Violence Support Partnerships. The Single-Parent Emergency Fund that had processed over 12,000 applications in its first 3 years of operation. The report's cover had a photograph Emily had chosen herself, not of the Foundation's buildings or its leadership, or any of the things the world typically puts on the cover of a document meant to demonstrate significance. It was a photograph of a brown paper lunch bag with a child's name written on it in marker. No caption, no explanation, just the bag. The people who knew the story understood immediately. The people who didn't know the story found themselves wanting to. That was exactly the point. Ryan saw the report. He read it in his office on a Friday afternoon and sat with it for a long time. He had over 6 years developed what could honestly be called a completely different relationship with the concept of success, a reckoning that had been uncomfortable and slow and ongoing, the kind that doesn't arrive as a single revelation, but as a steady accumulation of evidence that your previous framework was built on the wrong materials. He was a better father than he had been a husband. He knew that. He was not certain he deserved credit for knowing it, since knowing it had required being stripped of almost every illusion he had constructed about himself, but he held it anyway as the thing most worth protecting going forward. He sent Emily a message that afternoon. Not an attempt at conversation, not a bid for something. Just 4 sentences which he had thought about for a long time before sending. It said, "I read the 7-year report today. Your father would have been very proud. I understand now what I failed to understand then. Thank you for making sure Grace has a mother like you." He put his phone face down on his desk and did not wait for a response because he had sent it without needing one. He had said it because it was true, and because the version of himself he was trying to build was the version that said true things regardless of what came back. Emily read the message that evening after Grace was asleep. She sat on the couch in the quiet of the townhouse and read it twice and then set her phone down and looked at the ceiling for a moment. She did not respond that night. She thought about it for 3 days, not agonizing, not dramatic, just sitting with it the way she sat with things that required care. Then she typed a single line and sent it. "She's going to be extraordinary. You should make sure she knows you think so." That was all. It was enough. That summer, on a warm Saturday in July, Emily took Grace back to the apartment in South Boston. Grace was 6.5 and had her mother's curiosity and her grandfather's eyes and an opinion about everything, and she walked through the small rooms with the focused attention of someone conducting a serious investigation. She stopped at the column of pencil marks on the wall. "What are these?" she said. "Your grandfather measured my height there," Emily said. "Every year on my birthday, from when I was very small." Grace studied the marks for a long time. She pointed at the lowest one. "Is this when you were my age?" "A little younger. 5. Grace pressed her hand flat against the wall. Beside the marks, her small fingers spread wide. "Can you measure me?" Emily looked at her daughter, at those dark, steady eyes, at the determined set of her mouth, at the quality of presence she carried in her small body that already felt like something significant, trying to get fully born into the world. She found a pencil in the kitchen drawer. She stood Grace against the wall. She made the mark. She wrote the date. She wrote Grace, July 14th, 6 years old. Grace looked at it with satisfaction. "Now I'm part of it," she said. Emily looked at her daughter's name on the wall beside her own, beside the date her father had written in this same apartment 30 years ago, and felt something complete itself. A circle closing a story, finding its proper shape, a line drawn from one generation to the next, in pencil on an apartment wall. "Yes," Emily said. "Now you're part of it." She put her arm around her daughter's shoulders, and Grace leaned into her, without self-consciousness, the way children lean into the people they trust completely. And they stood together in the quiet of the apartment, where everything had begun, and everything had been protected, and everything had been passed forward into hands that were ready to hold it. Outside, the city moved and hummed and kept going. And inside, in a small apartment in South Boston, the most important thing Harold Carter had ever built, not a trust, not a foundation, not a fortune, stood at 6 years old, with her hand pressed against a wall, and her name written in pencil beside her mother's and her great-grandfather's quiet love embedded in everything around her. Ryan Walker lost $1 billion fortune the morning he walked out that kitchen door. But what he truly lost and spent the rest of his life understanding he had lost was the chance to stand in that room, the chance to be part of that story, the chance to belong to a family that was built from the very beginning on the only foundation that actually holds. Emily Carter did not need revenge to win. She only needed to become fully and without apology exactly who her father had always known she was, and that was the most complete victory of all.